Welcome to the UGC EPG Pathshala lecture series in computer science. In this series of lectures, we have been looking at the subject software engineering. This session will be an extract and continuation from the previous session, wherein we are talking about risk management, which are particularly associated with the software. So, we call it as software risk management. So, as this is the continuation, we will continue with the same list of objectives. In the previous session, we have been discussing about the risk management principles. Now, we will talk in terms of the paradigms associated with the risk management. So, initially we are to ascertain by identifying the various components of risk, wherein we search for risk before they create a major problem. So, understand and take out those risks, identify those risks which would create more problems. If in case we can analyze to understand the nature, kind of risk and gather information about the risk, so that can be an analysis phase. And then we plan to convert them into actions and implement them. Further, we track so that we can monitor on the necessary impacts and actions. And as the next phase, we may have to try either to completely remove out of it or to control this kind of a risk, where we call it as the correction measure, or to correct the deviation and make necessary amendments, we call it as a control measure. And finally, we may have to communicate on this emerging risk and current risk and the plans that are to be undertaken. How are these risk management handled within this project management? As we say, project management is a overall, or risk management is a subset of project management. So, as we have indicated on the project management, we say planning, organizing, directing, controlling are the major phases of project management, but then within this project management, if at all a risk happens, how do we come across? So, at the planning phase, if a risk is supposed to happen, we are looking for desired results. The strategies that we have understood from the previous cases, we will try applying all those strategies so that it does not affect the outcome. Not only that, we are getting all things better together so that the desired results are obtained. This is possible because of organizing all the activities together, thereby we are trying to ensure the efficiency, and we are also try saving a lot of time. And the third component of project management becomes directing. So, communication that takes place and exchange of ideas is formatted in this phase. And in the last phase of controlling, we take feedback and evaluation for risk management. So, this slide, although it particularly talks about project management, but then how risks are being managed as part of project management is also looked after. As a team, if at all we are to ascertain on the risk management principles, it has been looked after from two different principles. One is called a shared product vision, the other one is a teamwork. Shared product vision is a common goal between the team and the supplier, and this is to be established so that the vision is very lucid. Whereas, when it comes to the teamwork, we work collectively towards achieving a common goal. So, there exists a best way to snub the risk to some extent is to involve the customers right from the beginning and build a team oriented approach. So, if at all we wanted to reduce the quantum of risk, it is obvious that we may involve the customers as a member of a team, so that every single approach we tend to produce, customers are also getting involved, thereby their feedbacks would impact a lot. How does this risk management affect in terms of small project? So, starting from a very smaller project to a large project, in large project it might cost less, but then with respect to small projects it might cost more. So, this has been explained in three different angles. Right at the preparation for this risk, we may have to look at the external and internal risk, wherein there are uncertain requirements, there may be possibilities of unknown technology, there might be infeasible designs, and there might be cost and schedule which might be uncertain in nature. But then if we try identifying and analyzing on these risks, we may understand the nature of risk, and we also try prioritizing the risk and we can avoid or try solving certain gray areas. And the third point is on the mitigation of the risk. We accept risk, we transfer it, we avoid it, we try to control it. So these are the various strategies that we look after as a component of mitigation, where during the implementation we may have to mitigate all the quantum of risk that are accepted. So whenever we are about to assess the risk impact, not all risks need to be subject to the monitoring and control. So not every risk that is associated will be monitored and controlled. So we may have to apply scenario analysis to analyze the risk event impact. That means we have to determine all the consequences and the severity if the event happens. We have to identify when or during the project or at the time when the event is likely to happen. Not just that, we will estimate on the probability that the risk event will occur. Finally, we will determine how difficult it will be to detect the event occurrence. We may have to assess the risk impact over various phases, starting from, if at all we understand the risk event, there can be interfacing problems, there can be system freezing problems, there can be user backlash, there can be hardware malfunctioning. What is the impact of this kind of risk, and when is this risk able to happen? So if at all you look at any specific event, the likelihood of the risk, impact of the risk, detection difficulty of the risk, and when is it supposed to emerge are all being studied here. If at all we look for the hardware malfunction, the likelihood is very minimal and the impact is heavy and the detection difficulty is heavy. This is when it is to be installed. So during the installation phase, if the hardware malfunctions, then the impact and the detection difficulty is being higher, but then the likelihood is being the minimal. As part of mitigation strategy, we may have to respond to the risk, and the actions that are taken during the project can either be to reduce the likelihood of the risk or to reduce the impact of the risk. Whether we may have to reduce the likelihood or the impact is decided by the developer. So if at all the management decides on reducing the likelihood of the defect, then there may be at most possibilities that it can go for not majorly costing on the budget. In case of retaining risk, usually for majority of events, this happens with low probability, but then it gives a high impact when no alternate strategy is being feasible, and this has a contingency plan which is ready in case of event occurs. And the third strategy is on the sharing risk, where we have multiple units associated with the project that assume some portion of the risk, and we also have risk transfer, which is assumed and managed by unit outside the immediate project, in case the risk associated with the balloon vehicle are transferred to the project management. How are we to develop a response for all these risk factors? If at all we are to mitigate, how are we to develop the response for all these risk factors? So this identifies the primary components necessary for managing the risk, starting from what response strategy will be used, how will the risk event be detected and the response getting triggered, what plan will be put in place in response to the event, who will be responsible for monitoring and controlling the risk. So these are the questionnaires or the list of questionnaire which is prepared in the beginning, and if at all we can arrive at an answer for all this questionnaire, then the response can be easily fetched. So this is a response development phase where we have the risk of events. In the previous case we were looking out for likelihood and the detection ratio, but then here, because of such an event, we are looking for the response, contingency plan, and what would be triggered and the person who will be responsible. Because of the contingency plan, there can be technical aspects of a project that can have most severe outcomes. The major responsibility of the contingency plan is to mitigate. So mitigate by building and testing prototypes of critical components. Not just that, we may have to make the backup available all the time, and alternate designs would reduce the quantum of risk. Because of such a risk, The schedule usually require a trade-off, that thereby we can manage on the slack time to provide resources for delayed components. We can also bring in more people to reduce the performance. Primarily, the risk associated with cost usually result from estimated errors and omissions. Time and cost are majorly related. Trade-off, schedule delays with lower cost. We should not deviate from the scope, and this option removes the components of the project but still allow the primary mission to proceed. After looking at all these quantum of risk and the mitigation plans, we may have to understand how to manage these risks. We first try determining the risk sources and categories, determine the risk parameters, establish the risk management strategy, identify the major quantum of or components of risk, evaluate and prioritize, list it out one after another, basically by putting up a questionnaire and looking after its impact, develop and implement risk mitigation plans. Risk mitigation is just a part of overall risk management, wherein an effective strategy for dealing with risk must consider three different issues. One is a risk mitigation, the second one is monitoring and management and contingency plan. Risk mitigation is to avoid, is a primary strategy and is achieved through a plan. So, the strategy of reducing staff turnover, risk of high staff turnover is being addressed here. We are trying to meet with current staff to determine causes of turnover, where we have poor working conditions, we have low pay, competitive job market. So, we may have to address all these components in the beginning. This is on the management perspective of it. Mitigation or avoiding those causes that are under our control before the project starts. So, these are certain areas wherein we may have to address this before we start the project. So, once the project commences, assume turnover will occur and develop techniques to ensure continuity when the people leave. We may have to organize project teams so that information about each team development activity is widely dispersed. We are to define documentation standards and establish mechanisms primarily to ensure that documents are developed in a timely manner. We are actually to conduct peer reviews of all work and match up to the speed and up to the deadline that we have provided. And at times we are also to back up staff members for every critical technologist. So, everybody has to be replaced with, should be replaceable by another person who actually knows and gets to know the job. If at all it is not possible, then they may have to have a knowledge transfer system also. So, during the risk monitoring, the project manager monitors various factors that may provide an indication of whether a risk is becoming more or less likely, and we try understanding on the contingency plan, assuming that the mitigation efforts have failed and that the risk has become reality. Here comes the strategy of RMMM, which means risk mitigation, monitor and management steps that incur additional project cost. If you look at larger projects, it has been identified that there might be a possibility of 30 to 40 risks. These risks are not limited to the software project itself, but then they can occur and can be delivered to the user also. How are we to look at the safety and the hazard of these kind of a risk? To ensure on the quality process, to assure on the quality, there has been a list of activities that focus on the identification and assessment of potential hazards that may affect software negatively and cause an entire system to fail. If the same hazards can be identified early during the process, that means we are making it proactive in nature, the software design features can be specified that will either tries eliminating or tries controlling potential hazards. So, what do we do here? Because of this RMMM plan, which is mitigation, monitor and management, is a part of a software development plan and may be separate document. This plan has been documented and the project has begun, starting from mitigation and monitoring as a beginning stage. Because of mitigation, we try avoiding problem activity Because of monitoring, we track on every activity of the project. This monitoring has three different objectives. One is to assess whether predicted risk do in fact occur, and it tries to ensure that the risk aversion steps defined for the risk are being properly applied, to collect all the information that can be used for future risk analysis. So from this, we will get a list of findings from risk monitoring, and this may allow the project manager to ascertain what risk caused which problems throughout the project. 7 principles that are associated with the project risk management. One is on the global perspective, to maintain the software risk with the context of system and business problems that is intended to solve, and take forward a looking view which we have already looked at, where we think proactively about the risk that may arise in future and try establishing a contingency plan for all this risk, and we may encourage on open communication between the stakeholders and the users to point out risk at any point in time. Not just that, we are also ascertaining the integration factor of the risk management, where we integrate the consideration of risk into the software process, and we also try emphasizing on the continuous process of risk management, where we tend to modify the identified risk as more becomes known and a new risk or better insight is achieved. We also try developing a shared product vision, where because of the shared product vision, all stakeholders facilitate better risk identification and assessment standards. Not just that, we also ensure and encourage creating teamwork, wherein customer also becoming a part of the team, so that any feedback and evaluation being done, it is under the purview of the customer. How can we control on the risk response process? So it's part of the risk management plan. This should specify the risk responses and the mechanism used to control all the process. So finally, we need to continuously monitor for risk triggers, where the intention is to potentially identify the risk events that should be cleared off at the early stage of the project and monitored for each events that immediately commences. So every risk that is associated is being assigned to a specific person. If at all, for a large projects, if you identify 30 to 40 risks in the beginning, every risk is being identified or assigned to an individual person, so that they make it more matured, or they make a proactive system, so that whenever that risk happens, that is being managed or controlled and being processed further. So we need an environment where problems are readily reported, embraced, and most of the times it also need to be solved. So because of this risk response process control, we will be able to generate the person who is responsible to look after the risk, and there should be a person on the top level management who can approve on the risk. There will be another persons who can approve on the changes that are associated with the risk, and there need to be a clearly picturized format which would say, if at all there seems to be a malfunction on the hardware, or the processes are getting failed because of some risk factors, or there needs to be a change that is to be associated with the document. So by preparing a template, we will be able to ascertain on what would be the impact of every risk component or every risk event, and there will be a thorough study on who has done the revision to the plan, contingency plan, and who is responsible for it, and who has taken a decision of change management. And finally, we will also try understanding who is notified of what changes at what point in time. As a summary, we have also understood right from the understanding of risk, which is uncertain in nature. We have also understood on the various characteristics, categories of risk mitigation, management and monitoring plan. Whenever there seems to be a risk there will be a riding factor on the software project which in common sense dictates risk analysis. Yet most of the project managers do it informally and superficially. They are making it reactive in nature most of the times and rather than making it proactive. However, the time spent in terms of looking at the results of risk management are on less upheaval during the project, a greater ability to track and control a project. They also have a confidence that comes with planning for problems before they occur. And finally, the risk management absorbs a significant quantum of project planning effort. If at all there seems to be a discussion on the overall project management, there will be a team of people who will be talk about their risk factors also. So this takes almost around 40% of the effect of project management team to study on the various risk, whether the project could be low or high, or whether the project could be a small project or a large project. But it has been definite enough that the effort that has been studied on this risk management is worth it. Thank you.